right. Madam Chair, it's 8:30 and we are live and ready to go for you.
Okay, good morning, everyone, and welcome to Tuesday, May 11th. We're essentially at the middle of May already. Yay! This is Chair Catherine Harrington, and this morning I'm joined by Commissioner Jerry Willie, Commissioner Roy Rogers, and Commissioner Nafisa Fai. And a little bit later, Commissioner Pam Treese will be joining us. The first item on the agenda is board communication. Who would like to go first? Go ahead, Commissioner Willie.
What the heck, in honor of Pam, who's always supposed to go first, I will go first. It was always an interesting week meeting with constituents. This one was a person who was interested in revisiting, I guess, a decision that the board made probably 20 years ago about certain events that can be held in the rural sections of our county. This was in particular to weddings. So I've had Alan is laughing. I've Megan will be reaching out to try and get some history on that so we can respond back to that person. Council of Trust Lands meeting was last week again, and their purpose was the amicus brief that they were going to submit through on the Lynn County lawsuit. So we got an update on that, and Alan's memo was very consistent with the message that we heard from them in regards to it's actually we need to be concerned about our home rule abilities at the county, and we are losing those as we go, and certainly have the possibility of that in this case as well. Attended the Fair Board meeting, and we talked more about what the fair is going to look like this year, and including the 4-Hers and the other farm groups. And Chair, really appreciate you reaching out to the state and getting more guidance for the 4-Hers and what they can and cannot do, certainly during the pandemic. And so we want to follow those guidelines, but I'll have more information for you over the next few weeks as to what the fair is going to look like this year. Of course, we all did the recording for the Asian and Pacific Islander month, and that was fun. And as you saw just a few minutes ago, I still had the backdrop still up there, so I had to remember how to take that down. But that was fun, and we'll hear more about that, I'm assuming, as those recordings are prepared for prime time. And then the STIA meeting, the Salmonberry Trail Intergovernmental Agency meeting, was also there. Senator Johnson joined us, kind of gave us an update on some of the funding possibilities. We did not get selected by Congresswoman Bonamici's office for their earmark money, and we missed a couple of other opportunities because of that, but we are now looking at a variety of other ways to secure some funding for the trail and get that part of it started. So we're moving along on that, and it's exciting to watch that. I am going to be taking a small group on a short trail walk on the Salmonberry Trail here probably in the next month, and so we're excited about going out and just seeing. I think it's just going to be about 1 mile, but it's going to be very interesting. It's going to be beautiful. So other than that, business as usual. Good old Clean Water Services Budget Day on last Friday. We all attended that, and that was a great presentation. You did a great job, Diane. So be sure and communicate that to your group. So that's all I got.
So Commissioner Willie, there were multiple county commissioners who expressed that they'd like to join on a Salmonberry Trail walk. Is that still in the works?
Yeah, I met with Megan yesterday, and we're trying to reach out to John Paul to get a couple of dates. You'll hear more about that. And yes, I will be putting that invite out. There's a couple of people on this meeting that have already expressed their end. So, so yes, and I'll certainly be letting you know, Chair, when that's available.
We've all been living under COVID restrictions for so long. I'm starting to make a list of things I'm looking forward to doing.
Yeah, yeah. Well, that's going to be one of them. That's going to be. I'm really excited about this. I don't even know where we start, where we finish, but I'm told that it's a great walk, and we're going to see some tunnel and some trestles, and so yeah, it'll be fun. I'll let you know.
That's awesome. Great. Thank you. Commissioner
go
Rogers.
Sure, I'll go next. Yeah, it does sound fun, Jerry. It'll be a lot of fun. And by the way, I was laughing with Alan as well. We have been down that route more than once. And there's also some areas in the urban area that have the same issue. So it's a very comprehensive set of concerns that people have. And it'll be good for you to hear all of the challenges.
Are we talking about weddings or are we talking about trails? Sorry.
Weddings.
Oh,
weddings.
Thank you.
Weddings on trails, I think, is what we were talking about, right? No, the wedding part, and the trail part was the beginning. I'm a little torn about this afternoon's session. I've been asked to participate in the state ACTS chairs meeting, and that starts at 1:30. So I might bug out. Apologies. There's a select group, about 6 or 7, that they want on that call. So that's at 1:30. So I might miss this afternoon. You saw my agenda. I didn't put on all the constituent calls as well, but you'll see what I have coming up next Tuesday. Unfortunately, I'm going to miss our meeting. Unfortunately for me, because I'm a speaker, I guess always it takes a bit of a challenge. One of those technical conferences at Oregon Municipal Law and the auditing. So we'll have about 70, 80 people probably at that conference. So that's next Tuesday. Beyond that, Jerry, you didn't mention an event on Friday night. Unfortunately, I'm not able to attend it, but you might want to come back on and talk about that, and I'll get off.
Yeah, don't tell anybody that I forgot that. Right. Okay. Friday night is Family Justice Center's auction, virtual auction, and that opened up for bidding items Sunday and is continuing all this week and with the conclusion coming on Friday night. So if you haven't signed up yet, please do. And those things are always, for being virtual, they're always fun and they're entertaining, and you get to do it from your front room. So, but certainly the event is going to has some great items for auction, and I'd encourage everyone to please sign up and look at how you can support the Family Justice Center. Thank you, Roy, for reminding me.
Commissioner Fye, anything?
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, everyone. Yeah, I've been this is my first Washington County Board of Commissioners budget, and I've been engaged community or constituents and community conversations around the budget. So that's been really exciting to a learning for me, and also a really good way to engage the community around our budgeting process. I attended, which is really interesting for me to hear, the town hall for Peter DeFazio, Congressman, and he had an interesting take on congestion pricing, and that was with a really compelling reason why he's not for congestion pricing. So that was quite enlightening conversation, especially going into JPAC. And then I attended our CPO meetings, and that was a really good conversations. And Chair Harrington, you're on the agenda for CPO 6 for next month, and that constituent is super excited to meet with you and to really engage with you. And I've asked them to put you on the agenda for 10 minutes, and they said, no, we have a lot of questions. So be prepared, but they really are excited to have you and to come engage with you and ask you some questions about a lot of developments that are going on in District 1. So that's all I have.
On Congressman DeFazio and congestion pricing, how would you summarize his thinking about that? And what's he concerned about?
I think it goes a lot of what I've heard from others. I think and he's concerned, but I think he came a long way with I-5, and he alluded to making a compromise on that. But I think I don't want to put words in his mouth, but I think he's sort of torn about the idea of, like, what's the role of government? Should this, he doesn't want to privatize the idea of putting and then burdening people. So that's how I understood, is that he doesn't really want to privatize and tolling and charge people. And then there was the conversation around, like, where's that money going to go and how we're going to spend. So I think that's why I said his story was really compelling, because a lot of people are concerned who's going to be burdened by tolling and who's going to pay, and where is that money going to go. So I think that's why. But I didn't. With Metro congestion pricing study that was done, and a lot of the conversation I've heard when I listened in on that conversation around the panel experts, I think that study is on the right track, is what I've heard from the experts, and really giving credit to Oregon and the way where we're heading with tolling. But for him to be the chair of transportation at the federal level and to have that was a bit of I didn't know there was that side of a high level conversation happening. But I think he's not for privatizing.
Yeah, and learning from other places. It's really interesting. It's been an interesting juxtaposition as I've been an elected official for 14 years, and having the Federal Highway Administration requiring locals, i.e. state and down the chain, to look at tolling and congestion pricing versus having different members of our congressional delegation being on a different page than what the administration is requiring us to do. And at the local government level, it puts Metro councilors, county commissioners, and even city elected officials, city councilors, in the situation of having to explain and be the voice to say, look, the feds are requiring us to do this. If we want to continue to compete for the federal investment dollars that we need in order to improve bridges, highways, replace bridges, you name it, we have to go through the process of examining these things. And they're complicated. So we just have to keep doing our best and helping one another to understand the complexities of this. What do you think, Commissioner Rogers? What am I missing?
You're not. You said it probably the best I've heard. It's a federal requirement. But for those who were on that call, I asked Peter that question because I'd asked him before in the past. And the issue really is we've all paid for the federal highway system. So whether you live in Virginia or Florida or Texas, you paid for that Oregon I-5 or 205. And now we're talking about tolling, both at the regional level, the state level, tolling in which there may not be any capacity. So you're not buying anything other than to remove people from the highway. That presents some real heartburn. And I've asked Peter that before in DC. What does that mean to him? Not because I'm trying to discourage the viewpoint, but I'm trying to understand where he's at. Earl is now very soft on it, as well as Kurt. They're saying, wait a minute, our citizens are going to be paying this toll and they're not perceiving they're getting any value because now the rush is on. Well, let's take that additional money and let's fix 82nd. Let's take that additional money and fix some things in Oregon City or West Linn. And for those, what's it mean to Washington County real quickly? And I don't want to go too long, but what's it mean? Those employees at Intel, those employees that we have in the county, we're coming in from Clackamas, from Multnomah, are apt to pay this toll and not see anything for their toll. There's an equity issue too. Our equity is only surrounding this small area. What do you do about the poor person from Springfield, Oregon or Eugene, Oregon, who's traveling up and has to pay the toll, but the people in Portland, metropolitan area don't? And so there's a lot of issues on the other side of the river. I've heard from their commissioners. I've heard from their congressional person. They're not in favor at all because they don't perceive they're getting any value. And so there's a real tug that the region's going to have to deal with. So Catherine said, well, we don't have an option. You've got to study it. But where does it go? Puts us in a terrible position. Terrible.
Yep. And the Clackamas County Commission is talking about this actively through special meetings late yesterday and this morning because of provisions that are moving forward through the state legislature. So it's a continued conversation. Absolutely. So welcome, Commissioner Treese. We're on leadership communication. Would you like to share anything?
Just quickly, I had a constituent meeting about Cornell Road. There really isn't anything else at this point. I'm fine. Thank you. And I'm going to be muting myself and on and off camera. My apologies for today.
Not a problem. We're able to flex. So for me, I'll go back to the topic that Commissioner Willie was talking about with the fair and the 4-H FFA aspect of the fair. And really that's the animals and the other activities is really the heart of bringing rural and agriculture to the Washington County Fair. And so we're trying to figure out, or I'm not, the Fair Board is trying to figure out how to operationalize that aspect of the Washington County Fair, given that we continue to be in the state of flux, operational flux with this virus in our community. Things are moving positively. I asked a couple weeks ago, I asked for some help at both the state level as well as the OSU level. And that is still very much in the works. Just again, last night in meeting with Leah Horner, I explained the situation to her, and she's going to do some further digging as well. It may be that part of it is understanding how the updated protocols enable cohorts and the level of defining cohorts. For example, having a goat cohort or having goats with showers of certain age groups be a cohort. So the protocols don't limit 30 kids on the property at any one time. And it is 30 versus 20. The bottom line is it's complex. And we didn't have to do this a couple of years ago. And yep, it's aggravating. Aren't we all tired of how this virus is going? But we all know that the governor has a press conference later today, and we'll stay tuned on that. I think it will be useful later today for us to have some further discussion about that. The message remains the same. we need to continue to encourage all of our community members to get vaccinated. We're doing pretty well with our vaccination rates here in Washington County. Where did I put that Post-it? It's not handy at the moment, sorry. But we have a very good vaccination rate. And the good news is throughout the state for the second dose of the vaccine, there's a 95% through follow-up or a take rate on the vaccination. So folks are doing well. We do need to continue to help ensure that our hard to reach folks, as well as our community members who are historically disadvantaged or have been historically disadvantaged, have a means to get the vaccine easily. The good news, there's more good news, right? I mean, even Walmart is now taking walk-ins. So while the large vaccination centers like the convention center, the airport, maybe even the Hillsborough Stadium are going to be closing down throughout the month of June, the vaccinations continue to be more accessible right at neighborhood pharmacies, doctors' offices, medical clinics, that sort of thing. So that's good. And then yesterday, we all learned that the FDA has provided the emergency authorization for kids between the ages of 12 and 16 to get vaccinated as well. Yes, very good news. That's for Pfizer only. So a lot of good stuff happening. And if we can continue to keep the full court press on, then I think our recovery from this pandemic and the various closures, we can see some light at the end of the tunnel, perhaps. So stay tuned. We'll come back to those details later today. I had my second vaccination last Wednesday, and I marked out Thursday just to make sure I wouldn't be canceling out on meetings. I did feel tired, but it made for good time to read the budget. So I'm glad to have that behind me and looking forward to the 2-week break-in period or whatever for that full immunization to take hold there. It was mentioned previously, the CWS Budget Committee meeting on Friday, always a very helpful budget committee meeting. A lot of really good information that's in the budget is brought to life thanks to the effort of staff. And we have our first Washington County Budget Committee meeting this Thursday evening, and our next one next Monday evening. So we have a lot to go through there. I know that I'm spending time looking at different proposals in the proposed budget and asking why this, why that, because I want to make sure that we are able to invest in people. So stay tuned for discussion on that as we go through our budget committee meetings. Otherwise, I think, heads up to all of you, next Tuesday at work session, we need to close on what the topic is for our June 28th town hall. That town hall, I believe, is set up for Monday night, June 28th. And you may recall that at our last roundtable, April 22nd, there was a memo that talked about a laundry list of potential topics, and that we need to close on that topic sometime in the middle of May, so that if we want to have some support materials ready to tee that topic up for our community, or get any sort of surveys or questions out, we can do that in advance. So just wanted to bring that forward to your attention, and we'll close on it next week. Does that sound a-okay? Sound like a plan? Okay, terrific, great. All righty. Alan, we have a memo from you on the amicus brief, but between you and Tanya, we need to figure out also how to get the alternate HCP idea before the Board of Commissioners as well. So I mentioned that last week, but we've got to figure out how to stage that so that we have the appropriate outside speaker set up to represent that idea. It has been submitted to the states, not a problem, but as mentioned, Commissioner Willie and I in that all commissioners meeting of back in April, we abstained from the vote because we hadn't had the opportunity to talk about it as a board. So we just need to figure that out.
Right, I can work with Tanya to get some time on the board to talk about that and get someone here to give us a presentation on it. And again, it's been submitted without our representation, but I think the Board of Forestry would be interested in our opinion, as we are one of the larger landowners in the state forests.
And Mark Rasmussen is the chief person for the alternate HCP proposal, so we'll need to make sure he's invited to speak to that as well. Because it wouldn't be right for Commissioner Willie and or me, either one of us, to have to represent that idea because it's not our proposal. So.
Yeah, and just that alternate idea is available. Alan's got a copy of it. It's about a 15-page document, but it's got some really good information in it. So we should make sure that we give the commissioners opportunity in advance of that meeting to review and read that document.
I thought I sent that to all commissioners.
I thought so too, and I don't know. I'm just making sure that we have that available.
Yeah.
I can send that out again just in case.
Yeah, great. All righty. So is that it? I think anything else from commissioners on board communication? All righty, we'll turn now to leadership communication. Ms. Angie.
Good morning, Chair Harrington, Board of Commissioners. So I believe the board knows that I do like data, so I do want to start out with a few data points. So speaking of vaccinations, 61% of eligible Washington County residents have been vaccinated with the first dose, and 34% have completed the series. So we are tracking well in vaccinations and pushing the information out. We have an enhanced communication with our city and special district partners so that they can share vaccination information on their social media feeds as well. So really appreciate that partnership. What was mentioned earlier was excitement about summer events, such as the fair right around the corner. Our cities and special districts also are receiving this type of inquiry from the community. And so HHS recently has put together and refreshed the guidance relative to events so that we can be supporting event planners as they look forward to the summer months. Relative to our employee workforce, we do have one COVID positive case and one quarantine close contact. So that number has gone down over the last few weeks. So really happy about that, and proud of our workforce for continuing to ensure safe operations. From an employee update standpoint, I did want to just mention a new staff member that has joined our housing team. Actually will be joining in a few months. Her name is Emily Rutz, and she most recently comes to us from the city of Beaverton. And prior to that, she worked for the city of Hillsborough. She is the housing department's first public relations and communications coordinator. This is incredibly important staffing add to the department as the department portfolio has increased and as we have increased our engagement activities with the community. What this will also do is be a slight relief valve in the county administration office for Philip and Julie as they were providing the housing communication support prior to this. So just wanted to share that staffing update as we continue to build out our housing team to support our housing portfolio. And that concludes my weekly report.
It'll be great to have that expertise on board. I was reminded through Project Turnkey that you can make information available, but you can't make people read it. And that pertains not only to people who live in our community, but also elected officials as well. So we just need to keep communicating it and go from there. I did neglect to share with all of you one piece of information that was staring at me right on my desk. And that was from AOC Day yesterday. At the Board of Directors meeting, we approved the new membership scheme as well as a budget framework. There were some various bills from the state legislature that AOC has taken a position on, most notably under public safety and supporting the roster or a roster of about 20 bills that the Oregon Sheriff's Association is supporting that, you know, the state legislators have put together. The most notable thing about yesterday was that it was the first return to a hybrid AOC Day set of meetings. They've always been hybrid, though the audio video pre-COVID wasn't quite as good as it is now. So there were many commissioners who went in person to Hood River for that meeting. I did not join it in person because I want to get through this 14-day period post-vaccination, but I look forward to attending the June meeting in person, which is June 14th in Sun River. And AOC is looking at having some additional, more in-person meetings. And rest assured, the conference in November, the annual conference, is being planned for face-to-face down in Eugene. So it's good to be able to be in the room with one another as there are gaps in the schedule to be able to talk. So sorry to jump back into that. Over to you, Alan.
All right, well, recruitment's in full swing in my office. We have several positions open, as you know. And Commissioner Willie, if you want to hear more about the long history of weddings and events in the rural area, I can give you an update on that. I said, as Commissioner Rogers knows, it's a long, difficult history. And
I'm interested in that too, as
okay,
all of the rural areas in my district.
Certainly, I can give you both some of the long history of that. We've had a number of land use cases going up on that. So anyway, with that, that's the conclusion of my report. One other thing, there'll be an important update on some of our litigation coming this Friday in a confidential memo to the board. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you. Diane, Clean Water Services.
Good morning, Chair Harrington and the Board of Directors for Clean Water Services. All systems are running fully, so we're doing well at Clean Water Services. And I do want to extend my thanks and appreciation to the Board of Directors and for our Clean Water Advisory Commission members that worked with us last Friday to review our budget. And the team is very appreciative of the time spent on Friday with us. We are currently managing 4 exposure cases and 1 positive COVID case at our administrative building. But other than that, the team is doing well and working with our team members that need support. So everyone is, again, looking forward to the summer arriving and trying to get back into some normalcy. So thank you.
All righty. Well then, why don't we turn to our remaining agenda items for the day. The next one is to appoint members to the Homeless Plan Advisory Committee. Kevin, could you please advance our team members on this topic?
Yes, Madam Chair. Mr. Calavar and Ms. Evans should be joining us right now.
Good morning, Chair Harrington. Good morning, Commissioners. My name is Komi Calavar, Housing Director. We are here to present for your consideration Chief Deputy Albert Roque for membership on the Housing Plan Advisory Committee. As you know, the HPAC is provides broad oversight on our homeless programs. The Road Home, which is the community plan to prevent and end homelessness. So this position became open when Commander McRae resigned. So if your board approves Chief Deputy Roque, his term will end December 2022. He'll be completing Errol's time. So Chief Deputy Roque has a BS in mechanical engineering. He worked for 16 years in manufacturing, consulting, and technology before moving into law enforcement, where he's been working for the past 18 years. He also was Chief of Police for the city of Cornelius. That was his job before his current one. And he's very active with national civic organizations. Chief Deputy Roque is a Cuban immigrant born in Havana, raised in New Jersey, speaks fluent Spanish, and his work, which is oversight of patrol and investigations. These are first responders, and they include the majority of the sheriff's office and countywide special teams that include mental health responses. And so that is the intersection with his work and our homeless efforts. So I think we only have 5 minutes, so so we'll be we are open for questions.
Commissioners, do we have any?
My colleague Annette has joined us.
Hello, Annette. Good to see you. Commissioners, do you have any questions or concerns with regard to moving forward with this recommendation? No? Seeing none. So we'll look forward to this coming before us for action.
2 weeks.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you all. Thank you, Commissioners.
Keep up the good work.
We're doing our best.
You're doing
Thank you,
great.
Tanya.
All righty. Next, we'll move to legislation update. It's been a busy time in the legislature.
Certainly has, Chair Harrington. Good morning, everyone. Chair Harrington, Board of Commissioners. For the record, my name is Jagjit Nagra, Government Relations Manager here at the county, and I'm joined by my team, Erin Doyle and Paige Spence. Today, we're going to be focusing on conversation on the state legislature, but due to some fast-moving guidance that we received, I'm going to just mention that at the outset as well. So next slide, please. So we had I was hoping to be a relatively short agenda today in terms of our state discussion. But yesterday, as many of you on the board likely know, we received our, and it's not on the slide, so please apologies for that. This came after the slide was completed. We received from Treasury what's known as the interim final rule. So this is effectively the guidance that we'll be using at this juncture for our first tranche, because remember, the ARPA funds will be coming in 2 tranches, right? We'll be getting one 60 days after signed, which is likely this month, and then we'll be getting the other 50% later on a year out. And so Jack and I are feverishly working through that. We actually have already scheduled a time to meet with Senator Merkley's office in addition to their Washington, D.C. policy team to discuss any questions that come up. What I can tell you is at first glance, it's a lot of what we expected. Flexibility being the mainstay, support for local governments, local businesses, resiliency, and recovery, right? And so as we continue to work through that, my goal for this week is to provide you with a more substantive overview of the guidance in this week's GR Weekly memo, which I hope to get out on Friday morning. Another bit of catch up I want to do with that guidance is also dispositive in the sense that it will probably shape what awards our local legislators give for the district specific set aside opportunity that we engaged in last week, as you'll recall. So that will be interesting to see how their staff aligns the projects that were selected or may not have been selected to comport with that guidance, right? Because we certainly don't want to be in a position where we're accepting an award without guidance from them that then conflicts with Treasury guidance. So we will be fastidiously watching on those ends. So for today's agenda, we have two main items to work through. First, we're going to go through our tried and true state legislative timeline. And then next, we're going to have a conversation focused on state legislative items. Paige Spence will be covering housing and homelessness. And then there'll be a pretty robust conversation in the HHS, the Health and Human Services, as related to House Bill 2417. And then finally, to close our presentation today, Aaron Doyle will be talking about two bills, one relating to tolling and the other relating to the road user fee. Next slide, please. So here's our timeline, just marching along, right? So May 14th, coming up this week, we have our second chamber deadline for most committees. Notably again, May 19th, we have our next revenue forecast coming up. As I've been highlighting for a few weeks now, this will be really interesting, especially considering the influx of federal investment. May 28th will be the second chamber deadline for most committees once again. And if keen observers of this, you're going to see there's in red a target sine die day of June 18th. I can tell you the government relations team is very much looking forward to that date. And of course, the constitutional sine die, which is June 27th. This kind of gives you a snapshot. We are moving very close to the end of session. Budget conversations are happening in a very robust manner, and we're all deeply engaged. So with that, I will turn it over to my colleague, Paige Spence. Next slide, please.
Thank you, Jagjeet, and good morning, Chair Harrington and Board of Commissioners. I have two slides for you today, as usual, broken down by the departments in my portfolio. But before I begin discussing our state legislative work, I have one late add business item related to our federal work. On Friday, in your capacity as the Housing Authority of Washington County Board, you received the good news from Assistant Director Josh Kreitz that our Housing Authority was accepted into HUD's Moving to Work program. What you may or may not recall is that back in January, our Van Scoyoc and associate colleagues assisted government relations with the application, including a letter of support from Senators Mark Lee and Wyden and Congresswoman Bonamici. So I was hoping to just get a thumbs up from your board this morning to work with your staff assistants to draft a short letter to our federal delegation, thanking them for that support and letting them know we were accepted into the program. Great, I'm seeing the chair say that is something I will initiate, so I'll get on that. Thank you. Okay, great.
Commissioners, you okay with that?
Awesome. Thank you all. I will begin work on that and contact your staff assistants to get the language right and get that out the door. So thank you. And congratulations to the Housing Authority. I know they're very excited about beginning this innovative work. Okay, with that, thank you. I will move on to our state legislative update. And as Jagjeet mentioned, first, I'm going to cover sort of just a quick status update on some of the housing and homelessness bills that your board has been tracking. And so the first of these is Senate Bill 282. Protections for tenants. That's actually going to be on the House floor today, having already cleared the Senate and expected to be signed by the governor. This bill is really important. As you'll recall, the state eviction moratorium ends on June 30th, 2021, and the federal eviction moratorium was overturned. So it's incredibly important to have these state protections in place. The Department of Justice at the federal level is planning to appeal a federal district court judge's denial of validity for the CDC moratorium. But all to say, here in Oregon, we have leadership that has really ensured that we have basic protections for our renters during COVID. Senate Bill 282 passes bipartisan support and has final amendments that will be signed into law by the governor, hopefully, that came from a work group of tenant and landlord advocates and have no opposition. So this is a really important step, not just for folks who need COVID relief, but wildfire relief. Yeah, Chair Harrington.
I'm sorry, can you remind me of, with Senate Bill 282, what the outcome would be of that if and when signed?
Absolutely. Thank you for that question, Chair Harrington. So it does a few things. One of the most important ones is that it extends the grace period for repayment of back rent through February 2022. And this is designed, to give folks time to repay, but also to allow time for the more than $500 million in federal rent assistance to kind of flow and see how that will all shake out. It also allows families and others displaced by, whether it's COVID, wildfire, or other purposes or other catalysts to temporarily share housing without fear of eviction. If the landlord has a limitation on a number of folks who can be temporarily staying there, and then protects COVID era rental and credit records from being used against people if they apply to rent in the future. And there's some more details, but I think those are the most important takeaways for today. And then, so House Bill 2009, which is the foreclosure moratorium, same impetus here, protecting our homeowners, not instead of our renters. And this moratorium extension would be retroactive to this March when the governor's moratorium had lapsed, and extending it through June 30th of this year with authority for the governor to extend should she choose. House Bill 2006 and House Bill 3261, which are the sort of super siting for both new shelter construction and building conversion to an uncongregate shelter. Both of those have reached the governor's desk. House Bill 2006 has not yet been signed. House Bill 3261 has, so that is now law, which is pertinent for the Aloha Inn project that our housing authority has been working on. And then the last bill I wanted to mention on this slide is House Bill 3115, which I briefed your board on prior to session. It had a hearing in the Senate Judiciary Committee last week, having passed the House on party lines. There is not a work session or committee vote scheduled as of today, but I will update your board if none there is. Next slide, please. And I'm sorry, I should have asked if there's any questions or before I move on from housing. Okay, seeing none. I'm going to go out of order.
Wait a sec.
Oh, sorry. Sorry, Commissioner. Yes, please go ahead.
Just to update me on these, there's a lot of small landlords who are getting hurt right now. So are the state going to, is the proposal to backfill and pay them the rent so that they're not going to be hurt in this process? Is that, and is there funds there? Yeah,
Commissioner Rogers, that's a great question. And if you'd like, I'm happy to put together a memo that would sort of be even more comprehensive on the landlord tenant side of things. There's a few things in the works. One is, I think we have this Senate Bill 330 that we supported that provides a tax credit for landlords who accepted the Oregon Housing Community Services Department issued a tax credit to landlords. It's basically 80 cents on the dollar if landlords were accepting back rent through the OHCS program. That OHCS would basically be paid on behalf of the tenants. And then again, part of the delay in implementing the Senate Bill 282 sort of back rent and eviction moratorium repayment grace period is to allow, because there really are some uncertainties, and it's just around how the state is going to decide to use those federal dollars that are still expected to flow. It is over $500 million, and I'm happy to put together again kind of what that distribution would look like in Washington County. So there has been a robust conversation, and again in Senate Bill 282, it was a multifamily Northwest and another landlord stakeholder group, if you will, actively participated in that work group. And I think that the legislature and the advocates of the bill really did a good job in trying to balance the needs of tenants and landlords. I hope that helps begin to answer your question. And I see your hand.
Commissioner Rogers, you can find information right via our homepage about the payment program for landlords that's available today. And folks need to apply by next Monday, the 17th. So there's a program already underway without further movement from the state legislature to help landlords, just as you talked about.
Thank you for that information, Paige. It does. Maybe I'll take it offline, but there's still a lot of hurt, because what happens is that, for every dollar, they're promised 80 cents back in tax credits if they can use them. That doesn't, if all of us took a 20% haircut, that's it's not comfortable. Not all of these landlords are with a lot of facilities. They don't have a lot of rentals. They have small numbers. So they're not feeling real great about this, that they're in a position that they've been made whole on this process. So anyway, we can talk offline, but I can tell you there's some real angst. We may be approving things, but they're not particularly happy.
Yeah, I appreciate those comments, Commissioner Rogers, and I will do my best sort of, as I mentioned, there's some questions around how the federal dollars will flow. So I will do my best to work with our housing authority staff to figure out if we can put together sort of a matrix for you of everything that passed and kind of where we see things going, and if anything, what policy conversations or budget conversations Washington County might want to either lead or participate in for the 2022 short session. As Chair Harrington astutely mentioned, there is a robust Washington County program in place, but of course, should we find that there are additional needs, I do not expect that the 2022 short session will forget about COVID, right? And so there may be opportunities to do additional COVID relief work on various issues in the short session. So let's keep chatting.
Yeah, and the other thing I want to make clear, so go ahead, Commissioner Rogers.
I was just going to ask unrelated, when is sine die projected?
Yeah, so target, thanks for that question, Commissioner Rogers. Target sine die, as Jagjeet mentioned, which I don't think in my legislative career we've actually ever been able to end by that date, but it's I think June 17th, 18th, and then actual constitutional sine die is June 27th.
And back on the landlord compensation, I think one of the key messages is, in addition to there are compensation programs available today that folks can look into, and there is the possibility of additional ones. We are merely a helpful administrator, but landlords, and we can certainly help support advocacy for landlords, but to the degree that landlords have a problem, such as you highlighted, Commissioner Willie, they need to communicate that to their state legislators. I think we're in a period of time where it's really important for us to continue to play our role in advocating for our businesses, our landlords, and our residents, but we need to be really clear that we are not a replacement for people to communicate directly to their state legislators. So that's just a reminder there. Thank you. Sorry, Paige.
No, please, no apologies. I'm so glad that your board is interested in these issues, and thank you for the follow-up. And again, Commissioner Rogers, I'll try to do my best to update you as we continue to move forward with session with the kind of a full picture of what's passed. So now turning to Health and Human Services, I'm going to go out of order just because the first item I have is the more recent. The Sharps Disposal Informational Hearing with Representative that's on your slide. She has been continuing to be a wonderful public health advocate for Washington County and for all Oregonians. And sort of as follow-up to her drug take-back work, she is now really looking at Sharps disposal, which of course is a public and environmental health issue for people who use syringes for medical purposes. And also our HHS staff would say that Sharps waste should be accepted from any Sharps user in the state, no matter what type of drug is being used or for what purpose. They need to be safely collected and disposed of. So when I had put, as you guys know, legislative session moves very quickly. When I had included this information on our slide, I had planned to discuss our needle exchange work here at Washington County. But as often happens this time of year, plans change and the hearing was shortened. So Rep. Skelton led the discussion with Metro chime in, synthesizing the issue. And I think there's going to be a work group in the interim for a bill on Sharps disposal, either in the short session or in the 2023 long session, which seems simultaneously so far away, but also discussions about that session are already starting. Okay, so I would like to now dive into mobile mental health crisis response. And I have Nick Ocone, who is our Behavioral Health Division Manager with HHS here on the line as well. Thank you, Nick, so much for joining. I'm going to do my best to synthesize this very complex issue and then turn it over to Nick to either correct anything I've erroneously mentioned or add anything before turning it over to your board for discussion. So I mentioned this bill to you, House Bill 2417, way back at the beginning of session. It had been initially a CAHOOTS model bill introduced by Representative Tana Sanchez, who is the chair of the House Behavioral Health Committee. As session has progressed, the bill has really changed. And so now the CAHOOTS model is off the table. And what the bill really does now is center around funding for mobile mental health response in community appropriate forms throughout the state. And what's important to know for this morning is that there have been significant policy conversations in the public hearings for this bill led by the legislators, centering around the right entities to respond to mental health crises and what the response team composition should look like. Specifically, I would say that the policy discussions led by the legislators and the Oregon Health Authority show that they are interested in trending away from having law enforcement be at the core of mental health work in the state. And so this is a discussion that government relations and our partners will really need to lean into more in depth after session. But for today, the question I want to bring to your board is this. So, the state is proposing a policy choice in House Bill 2417 and potentially moving forward that law enforcement and behavioral health responders should be decoupled. So to receive state dollars for mobile mental health response through this vehicle 2417 and possibly moving forward, law enforcement, the state is saying, should not be a part of mental health response team. And of course, as you know, here in Washington County, our team is integrated into our mental health response teams. And to be abundantly clear, should House Bill 2417 pass, we can continue to operate these teams as we do now, but we would not be eligible for grant funding under the vehicle. And so if I were to request an amendment to take out the language, decoupling or saying that teams that have law enforcement should not be getting funding, I would do so, one, to make us eligible for this bill's funding, but two, to provide a mechanism through which I would return to the legislators, tell them about our effective mental health response team models in Washington County, which do have law enforcement integration, and encourage them not to think that law enforcement's inclusion in a mental health response team is necessarily harmful. So if your board would like me to take this approach, I want to speak with you about what the amendment proposal would look like that I would put forward. But before I discuss what those are, I want to take a pause and see if your board would like to discuss this policy question writ large, and also let Nick, who's on the line, see if I have missed anything or if he'd like to add anything, Nick.
Morning, Board of Commissioners. Paige, that was a really nice overview. I think the only thing that I would want to add is that in our initial conversations with legislators, as this has come up, we've been really clear that the mental health response team that pairs a sheriff, deputy, and a clinician is just one part of our larger continuum. And so we really want to make sure that we are emphasizing that we have a continuum of different interventions that are best able to meet our community's needs. And while this is a very important part of it, is not the only component with our mental health response. And so we really want to highlight it as that important intervention, but to also be, informing everybody that this is not the only way that we're intervening with the community when we're faced with somebody in crisis.
Thanks for that, Nick. And so, what if your board wanted to move forward and try to have the conversation with legislators, about the importance of law enforcement in our work? I would bring forward amendment language to either strike the language prohibiting law enforcement integrated into the mental health response teams, or seek to provide an exemption for our county as the largest entity who is operating a model of this kind, and make the point that the state and its commitment to improving statewide behavioral health outcomes would be imprudent to cut off our robust and effective program from state dollars. But before I move forward on any of these approaches, I wanted to offer your board the opportunity for discussion. Yes, Chair Harrington.
I need to hear, I have a question first that I need to hear some discussion of, and then I have a concern to share as well. So first on the question, I'm interested in understanding for the state legislators, what information do they have or belief do they have about how a mental health situation is raised to the attention for response, no matter who is the responder, because part of what we know is that some community members find themselves in a situation where they believe a situation is not safe, or they don't know what else to do, and so they call 911. And so is it that the state is saying, change your 911 response so that instead of effectuating or operationalizing a more law enforcement response, you have a different path? Or what is it that the legislators are looking at? model-wise?
Thank you for that question, Chair Harrington. I'm going to take a first cut at answering this, and then I might turn it over to Nick to talk about sort of policy trends in behavioral health and mental health response more generally, and kind of the direction that things are going in. But I think the first thing that's important to remember is that House Bill 2417, I would say, is one of the few behavioral health bills that is part of sort of it was not maybe intentionally originally introduced as a suite or package of bills, but I think now has turned to be such. One is the Governor's Behavioral Health Council bill. The other big one that really is kind of working in tandem with 2417 is House Bill 3069, which is that 988 bill, right? So Chair Harrington, you hit the nail on the head that currently 911 tends to be sort of the first number that people would call, right? But 988 is coming online at the direction of Congress to say that that's just that we're trying to keep these tracks very separate, right? That 911 and additional sort of law enforcement, ambulance, fire response is not appropriate, and therefore 988 would generate, a totally different kind of response and different team members of behavioral health. So I think in general we're following, a larger policy trend around decoupling the two. But I am hesitant to get into any details about legislator beliefs or things that I've heard on the record, and I'd rather turn it over to Nick with your subject matter expertise to maybe sort of shed, broader principles around this.
So my question isn't about, behavioral health schemes, new practices, or anything like that. Rather, what state legislators are actually responding to. And this goes to my concern. In meeting with the Senate co-chairs for Ways and Means and their House counterpart as well, I was struck by how all three of them were articulating the need for metrics and new methodologies. And so if we go in asking for an amendment that sticks to the current way, I believe that will be viewed as resistant, as opposed to embracing best practice. So that's why I'm really interested in what they're looking at. Having invested in watching the AOC HHS steering committee work, seeing it through the legislative committee, I have further information than perhaps some of my colleagues may be tracking. So it's all about where legislators are at this session that I'm concerned about.
Thank you so much for clarifying your question, Chair Harrington. And I'm sorry I was off the mark the first time. Yeah, I think what we're hearing is what I have heard, I would say anecdotally from individual meetings with the legislators and in the hearings, is not so much a focus on metrics and outcomes, but the policy conversations alongside sort of the BIPOC caucus's approach to public safety reform and disparate outcomes with law enforcement encounters between communities of color and not. So I think the legislators have made arguments around that sending law enforcement, sending a patrol car can be quite intimidating and maybe an obstacle to engaging the person using a clinical approach. I think that if I were to put an amendment forward, I would want to take some time this afternoon to work with Nick and I will go back and look through some of the written record and see if there are metrics to point to, because in my recollection of how these conversations have gone, it hasn't been so much metrics. And I would say that's the case both from Director Steve Allen, who's the Behavioral Health Director for the Oregon Health Authority, but also for the legislature, that they are just trying to decouple and trying to take away some of the resistance and fear around seeking mental health treatment because of the understanding that often comes with law enforcement partnership. And again, I feel like I'm not answering your question, and Nick has joined me in some of these legislator meetings and just has some better details, and I want to see if Nick might be able to put a finer point on it.
Well, the three folks that you all were part of in my recent meetings talked about the metrics and the best methods. So
No, I appreciate that,
message
Chair
loud and
Harrington.
clear.
Yeah, thank you. You'll recall that government relations was not on those calls and did get your notes. And so I'm not sure that I wasn't part of those discussions. And I'm really glad to hear that that was what they focused on, because that is not what I have heard from the policy committee members who have been really working the bill, especially Representative Sanchez, who's the chief sponsor. Nick, would you have anything to add here?
I don't have a whole lot to add. One thing that I think is important to point out is just with these conversations, I think that everybody wants to embrace the best methods. And I think that one of the things that we really want to emphasize is that we are open to considering the best way to engage the community, but also don't want to limit what our response might be. And just have heard so much feedback about this being a positive program and a really positive and strong partnership with our sheriff's department. And have received a lot of feedback that the marked patrol car is not an obstacle in the intervention, and is actually it is something that's supportive to the clinicians that are being put in sometimes some tenuous situations, and so they feel comfortable with the flexibility of the response and are able to actually engage community members that they wouldn't historically have been able to engage if this program wasn't in place. And so we just really want to make sure that any language isn't limiting what our response could be. And as I was mentioning before, we don't want to turn our back on methods that could be best practices going forward. We just want to make sure we have all the options on the table to support our community.
And Chair Harrington, let me finally say that your Chief of Staff, Elizabeth Mazzara-Myers, is fantastic, and she did send us the notes. So I was able to go back and check those notes just now from your Ways and Means Committee members at meetings. And what I am seeing is that the conversation around metrics and best practices may be centered more around community corrections and not behavioral health and mental health response. But I can go back and verify that. But I think what I'm hearing is a request for more information. So if your board would take this approach as acceptable, Nick and I could work together this afternoon to re-synthesize some of what we've heard from our meetings. And I can go back and re-watch the committee hearings and look at testimony and see if there are some data and metrics and some more specific finer points that the legislature is asking for. And then Nick and I can come back to you with a proposal by the end of today on moving forward with possible amendments.
Vice Chair Treese, it looks like Chair Harrington Tissue, do you want to take over at this moment?
I didn't understand what you said, Kevin.
It looks like the chair, oh, she is back now.
Okay, great. I'm here too. I'm just off camera. Thank you.
I didn't leave the meeting, Kevin.
I saw you step away, so I'm trying to assist. I
was just switching my standing desk so you wouldn't all have to endure the noise. Your question is the board interested in advancing an amendment to the legislators to, as Nick says, keep all the options on the table? And I, for one, have the concern that keeping all the options on the table forever is not going to be welcome. We're talking about funding, and all funding is eventually going to go to the co-chairs of Ways and Means. I think there are models for transition. And I haven't looked at this bill in detail yet to see how it advances a transition, but we need to embrace direction from the legislature in transitioning to the models that they're willing to fund. You know, there are a lot of county state shared revenues that they're redirecting the way they see fit. And unless we can give them one-pagers on a repeated basis that tell the story of how we are actually implementing best practices, we're going to continue to be left out in the cold. That was another one of the clear messages that I heard from the Ways and Means co-chairs. So, you know, I disagree that their feedback was limited to one specific area. It's the way they're thinking about all kinds of programs.
And Chair Harrington, if I may, I want to say that I think you really are picking up on the tone and tenor of what I've heard from the legislature. And one of the things that perhaps I should have said towards the beginning of my discussion of this topic was that I don't know that we'd be successful. I think you're absolutely right. And I think there is a possibility that we would, you know, kind of be out there on our own on this as the only jurisdiction who was actively discussing the role of law enforcement in behavioral health, which as your government relations staff, I'm happy either way, but I think it's good for your board to know. And so if what I'm hearing is the direction from your board that because this is just, again, one bill, and I think it's important to generate this policy discussion, but the only impact of not advancing an amendment to include this in the program is that we would not be able to get funding under this bill. And then sort of the broader policy conversation we could certainly have, and I think and will need to have after session. So I'm happy to take your board's direction.
I'm all for ensuring that there are transitions for models, absolutely. But colleagues, what are your thoughts? It's really a question of, are we going to move forward with an amendment to support a transition or not?
I would agree with you, Chair. If I'm hearing you correctly, that would be your choice, and I would agree with you on that, and probably also agree with the statement that our legislators need to be reminded that there are other successful programs, and ours being one of them, and we should not be either restricted from receiving funding or being required to modify our program that's we consider to be successful. So I would agree with you on this. I think we move ahead at your recommendation.
I would also agree, and would like to have some updates along the way.
Thank you for all the direction and discussion. Happy to hear more comments from more commissioners. What I think I'm hearing in the meantime is that I will not be advancing any amendment language, but that I will be continuing to track this bill very closely, and especially as it intertwines with 3069 and the ultimate sort of package of behavioral health funding, of course, that we know that we need. I think it's important to remember too that we do have some bread and butter funding that I am still very focused on, one of which is that there's a $22 million general fund shortfall in the governor's recommended budget for community mental health programs like the one that Nick operates. So we definitely are I will be having robust conversations around the need for our behavioral health funding. But absent any board discretion or board direction to the contrary, I will not be seeking any amendments to House Bill 2417. Am I hearing that right?
I'd weigh in too. I'm in the same position. I think Commissioner Willie said it well, and I don't think I have anything to correct it. We've got a good program. So I'm there.
I thought we were talking about the possibility of ensuring a transition for the model versus no comment. So I got a little whiplash in your last summary of no amendment.
Oh,
so
perhaps then I misheard you, Chair Harrington, and so now I have the whiplash because I think that I heard no amendment because we were not interested in transitioning away. Oh. Sorry, I misheard you. Okay, so we do want to pursue the amendment, and we do want to try to seek state funding to support the work that we're already doing. Okay, great, thank you. I'm so sorry that I misheard. Okay, with that is what we will advance, and Nick and I will be teaming up with our association, AOC-MHP, which is our Association of Community Mental Health Professionals, to make sure that we're delivering the message in the most strategic way, and I will be sure to update your board very closely as we progress. And thank you again for the robust discussion today. And if there, oh, sorry, Chair Harrington, did you have another comment? Sorry.
What's next?
Okay, great. With that, I will turn it over to my colleague, Erin Doyle, and we can advance to the next slide.
Good morning, board. Erin Doyle here to talk transportation. I apologize if there's any background noise. I have put my headphones on to the best of my ability, but there are people making loud noises outside my window this morning. Apropos of your conversation this morning during your updates and the discussion with Congressman DeFazio, I wanted to talk to you about the bill related to the tolling program that is being proposed. This House Bill 3065 is now on the -8 amendment, which had its first public hearing this morning, where I was not able to testify for various reasons. Number one being I haven't had a conversation with you yet. But number two being it was at the same time as being here with you this morning. Washington County has been participating in the conversation around that -8 amendment with the Speaker of the House, Representative McLean and Representative Power, as well as Clackamas and Multnomah Counties Metro, the City of Portland, and the environmental community. And that conversation will now transition into a broader conversation with a larger user group, the truckers, AAA, AGC. So the -8 might not be the final amendment, but I think through the conversations we've been having, we have gotten it into a really good place. But I'll let you know what it does. Basically, the House Bill 3065 is intended to allow ODOT to do some more flexible financing as they work to actually start the construction portion of the 205 project, as well as finishing the design around some other major projects that were contemplated in House Bill 2017 in 2017. And we briefly talked about what all the conversation has been around in previous meetings, but this is a more solid, close to final amendment. So at the end of this conversation, I just want to make sure that we have hit the right tone for Washington County and do accept the amendment as it's written, and we'll continue to work in that direction. So overall, the goal has, of course, been twofold. One, to ensure that the funds are there to do the actual construction as thought out in 2017 related to these major projects. I-205 and Rose Quarter being primary in the listed projects in 2017, but also now including Boone Bridge. So adding another project into the scheme of tolling and how the dollars are going to be used to pay for the projects related to that. So essentially, in the short term, the $30 million that was originally set aside in 2017 for I-5 Rose Quarter is now being expanded to be any of the following projects would be eligible. The Rose Quarter project remains eligible for the $30 million. I-205 from Stafford all the way through Highway 213, the Boone Bridge project, as well as implementation of the tolling program. And that is important to ODOT because the Oregon Department of Transportation needs the ability to flex their funding to go after some short-term borrowing before the tolling revenue comes in, which they would then bond against to do the bigger payments. And this is really important for moving 205 forward and the Abernathy Ridge project forward, because they are pretty much done with design and are now ready to go out for contract for starting the construction along the Abernathy Bridge. They just need, some financing tools to do that, but they don't want to stop the progress they've made on these other major projects. One other important thing to the conversation around House Bill 3065 is that there has been a lot of negotiation around the tension between the two purposes of any sort of congestion management pricing scheme that is put in place by the state legislature with the approval of the federal government. And so the -8 now has languages that acknowledges that any tolling can be used as a means to reduce traffic congestion just through the act of tolling itself by using a variable rate tolling as a possibility. And then finally, the last major change, there's a lot of technical changes to the bonding authority that I don't pay that close of attention to because it is really directed at the state and the treasurer's relationship. But the thing that is really important and has been the major point of the conversation that Washington County has been engaged in is how ODOT will work through the tolling program, what they'll be balancing, what they have to consider as far as how the tolling funds are used and how they manage the congestion. And essentially, we have worked really hard to make sure that both construction on the tollway is continuing to be made obvious that it is an allowed expense, but also that When it comes to the diversion funding, which is part of any federal program we have to create, basically, we can't just say we're only going to work on the tollway. The feds won't allow that. But we can't say we're going to work on every single street throughout the region with toll dollars. The feds won't allow that either. But we do have to mitigate for the diversion that is likely to be caused by a diversion program. So not only does the language in the -8 say very clearly that this money can be used for construction projects and congestion mitigation on the tollway, it can also be used for purposes of streets. They call them highways, but that's a technical term that basically means a road on which you can drive. We can mitigate the impacts of diversion for any adjacent, connected, or parallel highway. So this is trying to prevent all of the dollars collected in the tolling program from going to other projects like 82nd. There is an acknowledgement that 82nd really does need addressing. I would say that they are looking to find other means of financing that, and that's a conversation we should be paying attention to for purposes of TV Highway and how 82nd's been able, because they're similar in needs and scope, but the language is a little bit tighter as a result of the conversation that we've been having. The other really important thing that I think got included in the bill is that there is a very explicit demand that ODOT also has to consider the impacts to underrepresented and disadvantaged communities as they go through all of these processes of doing the analysis around any application they make to the federal government for a tolling program on the interstate freeways. This means that they have to look at how they can also make sure that those communities aren't feeling the brunt and bearing the full responsibility or diversion or payment of the tolling program, and so that the impacts are spread, but their voice is at the table. And I think that they've been doing that very successfully through the NEPA process. You've got that update from Chris Steffenbach and Amanda Garcia Snell, who's actually on that equity review committee. So those are some of the major components that have been negotiated around and discussed in this -8. The final thing is that there's been a broader addition, and where it doesn't just impact ODOT, but there is now a new requirement in state law that any local jurisdiction or road authority that is contemplating a congestion mitigation pricing scheme or tolling program at the local level must include other folks who might be impacted at the government to government level. So if, for example, Portland were to suggest a toll on a road that leads in and out of Washington County, we would be required to be brought to the table. And some other considerations that ODOT has to undertake also are reflected in that conversation, in the local conversation, such as impacts to traffic, safety, equity, and climate considerations. The one final piece that I will say is that there is a new requirement that a design review occur that truly takes into account the impacts that any congestion pricing program would have on the vehicle miles traveled projections, as well as the capacity needs for the future, and modify any design that or finalize design with those metrics and measurements also in mind, along with the traditional safety and maintenance that as an ODOT requirement. So today, what I'm looking for is a generalized support from the board that they support the direction that the -8 is in, and that Washington County can be supportive of the work that we have put into making that -8 really work for us. To give you some further context, Clackamas County did have the discussion at the commission level last night, and on a 4-to-1 vote, because they took it to a vote, approved the -8 amendment as written, is my understanding from my colleague over there. I don't know if the conversation changed this morning, but Multnomah County staff has also indicated generalized support, as has Metro and the city of Portland. And that I don't know how the hearing went the rest of this morning, but I'll listen back to that and give you an update on Friday. So right now I'm looking to the board to have a discussion on if we are on the right track as we move forward through the process of doing the application for the tolling program.
Commissioners, any questions or thumbs up?
I'm thumbs up. I think that Erin has done a great job in providing us the overview as well. Thank you, Erin.
Other commissioners?
Erin, I have a question regarding pardon me, the mitigation for traffic that moves off the system. If the system was designed either to add capacity or at least travel lanes, buses, i.e. that's some congressional folks feel, you know, a bus lane would be important. Would the mitigation issue in your mind still be there? Because you're building capacity and you're not off-flowing anything other than what normally would off-flow.
Ooh, that is probably more technical than policy conversation.
Okay.
But my understanding from the conversations that we've been engaged in is that the expectation is we're not just going to build lanes to build capacity, that we're trying to look at multiple ways in which to address the capacity issue, so that there is a multimodal. But there are restrictions on what the funds can be used for that are acknowledged in the Dash 8 amendments of both the federal highway program itself has restrictions, as well as Article 9. So the capacity that they'd be looking at building using these dollars would be that right-of-way types of projects. So as the requirement in this bill is not that you say you can only build capacity or you can only mitigate traffic. It's that as you look at how you design the new physical infrastructure, how much is taken care of through capacity building, but also how much capacity can be shifted to another mode of operation through other investments or through recognition that folks will avoid going on the freeway, which inherently builds capacity on the freeway, but then drive on surface streets, which then reach a capacity limitation as well. So I think to your question of if we just build more capacity, do we not worry about the mitigation? I don't think that ODOT expects that to be a viable solution. I don't think anyone believes that we can build our way out of a capacity concern at this point in time, but that we do have to make modifications to the system to bring up some of that physical capacity, but also that we have to make modifications to the system to move that capacity or the need for that capacity elsewhere in a way that more efficiently and effectively uses the capacity that we currently have. So that might be encouraging folks to take fewer trips, fewer single occupant trips, maybe more buses, alternative methods, so bikes, pedestrian, all of those things, but it still has, the funding still has to remain within that Article 9 restriction. So that was a lot of words. I don't know if we answered your question, Commissioner Rogers.
Well, I didn't mean to throw you something completely in the loop, but I don't think we've really been too creative in how we're looking at this. We've given this scenario that one, we want to reduce capacity, reduce traveling on the freeway. So we want to charge you more. Then we've created a problem on the off streets. So every jurisdiction along there wants some of that tolling revenue. Another option that is sort of in between that we've not really explored is what if you use those side lanes to run buses and trucks, which creates traffic. And so more creates traffic in those travel lanes from those larger vehicles and then frees up some freeway capacity. And I guess I'm just thinking out loud because I know that as you get out of the metropolitan region, you start getting a lot of pushback on trying to toll facilities that people think they already own. They've already paid for them, and now they're saying we're paying rent on what we own. And so there's going to be a lot of issues. So I don't know. I'm just talking off the top of my head too.
I think that's an indication, in part, that the conversation on what the final projects look like isn't done. There is a lot of process that has to move forward outside of the Abernathy Bridge. I think that's really the only one that has a design element that is at 90% completion. Everything else is at max 60% completion. So as this conversation moves forward and you start having that interaction with the federal government as well as other partners, you'll see that design that the state comes up with will have that reflection of when we move here, that transitions over here and we have to account for both. But that is going to be a heavily technical conversation where I think that our LUT staff is already engaging and really participating in making sure that our perspective is brought to the table and continues to be brought to the table at the state level with ODOT's technical staff, as well as at the commission level of the Oregon Transportation Commission, who will make final decisions on what applications look like before they get sent to the federal program. So I don't think that anything in this bill precludes that conversation from moving forward. It's just that that conversation is still ongoing on how we make sure we're balancing all of those things, and recognizing that tolls are very rarely popular, but that decision to pursue tolling as a potential means of paying for the ongoing problems of 205 and I-5 that does have a statewide impact was kind of had in 2017. And in order to enact the promises of making changes to the infrastructure in 2017, or those promises that were made in 2017, we need to get the funding stream correct and the design process implemented in state statute in a way that gives ODOT the direction that's needed.
And Erin's best government relations mind, as well as those of colleagues that she works with, is that this -8 amendment set does accomplish that. So the question before us today is, are we thumbs up on moving forward with the -8 amendments? Are there any other questions from commissioners, or do we? I know Commissioner Treese, we have your thumbs up. Commissioner Fye? Okay. Thank you, Erin, on that. Next one.
Yep. On the next one, this is even murkier of a conversation. So very excited to be having it with you this morning. House Bill 2342 is a bill that kind of came out, it came out of a conversation through the Rural User Task Force to look at a new methodology for stabilizing the income stream for basically the state highway trust fund that has been so reliant on gas taxes, which we have just seen, trailing down as cars become more fuel efficient and folks who use the road are paying less in gas taxes. One of this board's stated goals for this session and in the transportation world has been to find a stabilized version of revenue resources across the state to help us with our means of paying for the infrastructure that we have to be operated and maintained. 2342 is a fairly robust language that sets up basically a mandatory vehicle miles traveled program for high efficiency vehicles, which have been defined in the bill as vehicles of model year 2027 or later that have a mileage rating of 30 miles per gallon or greater would basically be enrolled into a per mile use charge program as opposed to paying gas taxes. And it would repeal the current ongoing voluntary test program known as ORGO. There has been a lot of conversation as to whether or not this concept is ready. A lot of folks on all sides of the issue are not happy with the final iteration that came out in 2342. So there are a number of amendments that have been proposed. This is not seeking your direction necessarily unless you have it, but more of a situational awareness of how this conversation is progressing. But essentially, there have been amendments that would basically set the timeline as opposed to setting the state policy, in saying that by 2027 or 2026 for model years 2027 cars, we will start a program. We'll figure out the program next year or in 2023. One of the things that AOC has been very cognizant of and been working very quickly on is to ensure that our local tools are not impacted by this, that it remains clear that this is not a replacement for vehicle registration fees, which we can use currently, or our local gas taxes. And if there's any potential for a local government to want to implement a vehicle mile traveled or road user fee of some other sort, all of those authorities would remain with us. So that's the one amendment that very clearly we are supportive of. Just right now, it's really unclear what the path forward is for this bill, but we think, or I think, based on conversations we've had, at most this session, we would see a date setting that time frame from which we'll transition those high efficiency vehicles off of a gas tax and into some sort of vehicle miles traveled or alternative flat rate. but there's a lot of conversation around what that does to incentivize or disincentivize the purchase of fuel efficient vehicles, as well as what all gets paid for to maintain the roads, as well as maintain the climate impacts of those roads. So it's kind of we thought we'd be further along in this conversation by now. That task force has been meeting for a number of years, but it is clearly not done, and the legislature has to figure out what they're doing. But there is hope that we will, in the next couple of years, see some program that is intended to stabilize those state revenues that do pay for our operations and maintenance through that 50-30-20 split, where we get 30% as counties. So that is all the update I have on that. I'm happy to answer any questions that you might have related to this or any other transportation or land use bills that are out there.
Thank you for that FYI. Jagjit, is there anything else that the team needs direction on from us today?
We can just move to the next slide, but no, if there's not any need for board discussion, then I think we are good to go.
Commissioners, do you have anything more? Commissioner Willie.
Yeah, I'd just make a comment on that road user fee. I firmly believe we've been having this conversation back when I was mayor with our federal delegation as well. VMT is not if, it's when. I think we're going to see a significant continuing increase in electric and hybrid vehicles. And I think this is something we need to move ahead on. It's a little frustrating that they're targeting 2027. I mean, that's 6 more years. And I would hope it doesn't take 6 years to develop this program. I guess that speaks for itself. But yeah, I think this is definitely a direction we as a state are going to have to be going. And I'm glad we're watching this, and I'm glad they have at least a House bill to have discussion.
Any other state or federal legislative questions for our team colleagues? Nope. Seeing none, the next item on our agenda is a short break. So why don't we take a 15-minute break and see you, well, a tiny bit shorter than a 15-minute break, and see everybody back here at 10:20. Okay.
Thank you.
Double mute, Chair Harrington.
Alan, thank you, Michael. Thanks for sending that alternate HCP document. I couldn't find where I sent that to commissioners at all, so thank you.
And to confirm, you wanted Mark Rasmussen to be the presenter on that?
Yes, as he was the generator of the idea.
Okay, great. That's what I thought. I just want to make sure.
Yeah. He did the presentation to the CFTL meeting. And I never remember to put the C on the end of that, CFTLC. Okay, we're back at 10:20 and looks like we have all the commissioners again. So we'll pick back up on our next topic, transportation requirements and procedures for development.
Good morning, Chair Harrington and commissioners. I've got Aaron Wardell, our principal transportation planner, and Stacy Shetler, county engineer, are actually going to walk us through the presentation. This is a pretty wonky topic, and so we have scheduled today's work session as kind of an introduction to the topic. If you have questions or would like some additional information, we'll be happy to come back to you. We've held some time at your June 8th work session as well, if needed. So the purpose of our conversation today is to bring you up to date on what's been a long effort. It's been pushed to the back burner several times due to a variety of other competing interests, but still an important topic that we're finally ready to bring forward. And it's really talking with you about how we review developments with regard to transportation and how we write conditions of approval for developments to mitigate their impacts on the transportation system. So I think with that, I'll go ahead and just ask Aaron to take over, or Stacy, and walk us through the presentation. And then all of us are available and ready to answer questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Stephen. Good morning, Chair Harrington and members of the Board of Commissioners. My name is Aaron Wardell. I am the Principal Transportation Planner, and I'll be giving this presentation today. With me is Stacy Shetler, our County Engineer, and he will also be available for answering questions at the end. Next slide, please. So Stephen just outlined our general schedule for bringing this forward to the board. Today, we are intended to give you information about our current procedure and some of the work we've done to date. On June 8th, we have time held on your agenda to come back for a second briefing to answer questions that are raised today and provide any additional information you would like to see. And then later this year, depending on board's direction, and then also another round of stakeholder engagement, we intend to bring forward consideration of updated procedures. Next slide. So our current regulations for how we do transportation system improvements were adopted 35 years ago in 1986 as a part of Resolution and Order 8695. Staff oftentimes use the shorthand RNO 8695 when we're referring to this, but what we're really talking about is our technical engineering standards for how we do transportation system development review. These procedures apply to development that occurs in unincorporated Washington County, both urban and rural, where we have land use authority. These procedures are also used to conduct development review when there are land use applications under city jurisdiction that impact county roads. We use the same methodology to review those. The updates to this process were included in the long-range planning work program to make updates to be consistent with our multimodal transportation system. This has actually been included in the long-range planning work program for a number of years. As Stephen alluded to, we've been chipping away at this gradually since about 2014, I think. Next slide, please. So I wanted to give some additional background about policy documents and previous studies that identified the needs for this effort. The first is that when we updated our transportation system plan in 2014, we included this as a strategy. Strategy 1.3.3, consider an update to Resolution and Order 8695 to implement safety improvements associated with new development and redevelopment. We prepared an issue paper in 2016 looking at strategies for filling walkway system gaps in urban unincorporated Washington County, and updating this resolution and order was one of the strategies identified in that paper. We also conducted a technical study in 2014 funded by a transportation growth management grant through ODOT and DLCD to look at our multimodal performance measures. and think about ways to evaluate our transportation system that go beyond looking at motor vehicle capacity. That last study is pretty interesting because right now Metro is considering an update to the regional mobility policy, and they're using many of the same measures and metrics that we evaluated as a part of that work. So this all fits together pretty well to bring this forward right now as those regional conversations are going on. Next slide, please. So this slide talks about how we require transportation system improvements in Washington County, and there's really three different components here. The first is that, well, the first two, when we do transportation development review, there's two different sets of requirements. The first are guided by the Community Development Code. And the Community Development Code is, of course, an adopted plan as a part of the county's comprehensive plan. The CDC requirements are for things like frontage improvements, access management, meaning where a driveway is located, how are they spaced, what are the site distance requirements for a development site, right-of-way dedication, and all of that is guided by our Community Development Code. RNO 8695 is our transportation engineering requirements. So things like traffic impact studies, the more technical engineering components are in RNO 8695. So it's important to note that it's not a part of the comprehensive plan. It is staff technical guidance. And then the third component of how we do transportation development review or requirements is the payment of the transportation development tax. So almost all development is required to pay the TDT towards system capacity. The TDT is intended to pay for impacts to the overall system. Our general estimate is that TDT pays for about 25%, maybe a little bit less than 25% of a development's impact on the system. Next slide. So these next two slides talk about some of the considerations for this update and some of the conversations that we've had that have informed the work that we've done. The first of these is that we have heard a lot from the community about desire for development to provide a larger share of their impact to the transportation system, particularly the multimodal transportation system. And that goes into that next slide, the next bullet, which is the increased scrutiny of development. And so this is something we hear a lot about from the community. They're paying attention when development occurs and they're looking at the improvements that are being made, and people notice when there are still gaps. So we often get questions about why development isn't filling all of the gaps out there in the system. We also have observed a trend towards smaller scale infill residential development, and I think this is something that's likely to continue as the trend, particularly in unincorporated urban Washington County. When we have these smaller scale developments, it gets complicated in what we can actually require to be filled due to proportionality and nexus of impact on the system. So it can be a little bit more difficult for staff to identify what could actually be done as a part of these smaller applications. Next slide. We do have this limited regulatory authority and what we can require developers to do, private developers to do for their improvements, particularly off-site. We oftentimes do have more ability when it's on-site or it's that site's frontage, but we can't always require someone to fix something that's a few blocks away on somebody else's property. We did evaluate different opportunities we may have, however, to incentivize developers to complete some of those off-site gaps where we can identify them. We have some great opportunities now because we've done recent studies like the First Last Mile study, as well as an inventory of our Americans with Disabilities system gaps. And we can utilize that information by working with developers to identify opportunities for them to fill those gaps and possibly receive TDT credit, for example, which can be quite valuable and something that some developers may be willing to do if we can identify the possibility for that. Next slide. So one of the important pieces of this work was to compare how the county does its process to how the cities in Washington County do their processes. We have consistently heard from developers as well as from the cities that we do things differently than they do, and sometimes that creates some challenges. So this slide summarizes some of the commonalities and some of the differences. And there's a lot of history for why the county has done things differently historically that we can go into on the question and answer period. Some of the commonalities, and this again is our existing process, not our proposed update. So some of the commonalities between the county and the cities is that our thresholds for analysis are based on the estimated vehicular trips added to the system as a part of that development. We did not find any explicit bicycle or pedestrian review criteria among the cities of Washington County that we looked at. We all use the same national engineering manuals and guidelines, and all cities in Washington County and the county collect the transportation development tax. So we all have those things in common. Now, some of the differences: the cities of Washington County generally do condition motor vehicle capacity improvements based on what's called the volume to capacity ratio performance requirements. Stephen warned you, this was going to be wonky. What we're basically talking about is how many cars fit on the road, how many cars fit in each lane on the road. That's volume to capacity. The county, on the other hand, uses a motor vehicle safety-based analysis, and we generally do not require capacity improvements. It's a little more complicated than that, because sometimes you can require a safety improvement that does result in a system capacity increase. So for example, you could, as a part of safety, require an additional turn lane. That is a capacity improvement, even though we were able to justify it out of a safety criteria. So this is a really complicated topic to talk about, but we do have some differences from the cities and how the cities do development review. And what it really comes down to is that the county has always relied on that motor vehicle safety-based analysis as our basic framework. Next slide.
Erin, can I ask you a question real quick? Or
Yes.
do you interrupt your flow? Okay.
Nope, go ahead.
There is a difference when you use VC standards in the city versus what we use in the county, and that could present some problem for cities over time as they annex, and that they monitor airshed requirements, and you're going to get different pollutants in the air, so you're going to measure differently. So how are we reconciled when we understand that someday a lot of these areas are going to be incorporated, and we're using different standards that create pollution issues along heavily corridored traffic areas, i.e. where we typically put high density, or we have a lot of bus travel, or a lot of vehicular travel. How are we ever going to come into reconciliation with that? And if that's too wonky, you can take it off stream with me, I understand, but there is an issue there.
There is, and it is really complicated and is really wonky. I think that when we look at our overall system performance, it is generally difficult to say that any one development caused that level of congestion, right? The county is becoming more urban. As we become more urban, we will have higher levels of congestion in different areas. It is somewhat unusual to have development of a large enough scale that it can add significant system capacity. Now, you could have requirements for turn lanes. I think that's fairly common. That is something that does come up quite a bit. But in other cases, you're not going to have development that's of that scale. So I think there's a lot of different components that can go into that, and particularly when we start talking about, what was the county's responsibility versus what was the city's responsibility. We also have the state and state requirements built into all of this as well. And so there's a lot of different layers of requirements and jurisdiction.
Can I propose that we come back to this item on slide 8 later?
We can certainly do that. I can keep moving forward.
Because I've got some questions too, but I think we're going to have some further discussion about this very topic.
Yeah, can you, when you come back with the questions too, can you be prepared to answer? It seems like when we don't address it, our MSTIP, which is all overprescribed, and we all know we got 5-6 years of projects, and probably 100 if we want to take the full list of improvements. So does that put pressure on the MSTIP list unfairly? And then how are we ever going to coordinate as annexation occurs? So yeah, thanks. I just want to squeeze those in if you're coming back.
We will note all of those for the question and answer period. So our objectives of doing this update, first of all, were to clarify our existing procedures, requirements, and definitions. Remember that this was initially adopted in 1986, so we had a lot of room for clarification and updates of definitions as we went through this. We intended to expand our safety, connectivity, and accessibility review associated with people walking, biking, and rolling. And I alluded to this earlier, where we talked about using the county's sidewalk and bike lane gap inventory and ADA ramp inventory information for improvement consideration as an explicit part of the development process. We would like to encourage or require offsite improvements by development consistent with our TDT credit eligibility provisions where necessary. And then that we would like to require cumulative traffic analysis for multiple phases of development. And this last bullet point gets to the fact that we may have developments that are occurring in phases. Maybe each phase incrementally isn't a very large impact, but overall it is a fairly large system impact. And we could require more improvements if we consider it cumulatively. Next slide. So this next slide compares our current process to the proposed updates. On the left side, what you're seeing is the average daily traffic estimate for a development. There's an important note there on the side. If you want to think about what do these traffic estimates actually mean, 40 trips per day is the estimated traffic for about 4 housing units. So our general estimate is that 10 trips a day per housing unit applies. So when we say that we are exempting developments that are less than 40 trips a day, that would be exempting a development that is 4 housing units or less of an impact on the system. So our current process required site distance, illumination, studies, and safety studies by applicant for developments that generated between 14 and 500 daily traffic trips per day. And then for trips that were above 500 average daily traffic, we required the same site distance and illumination study, as well as a safety study completed by the applicant. Under our proposed update, we would require those same things for trip generation between 40 and 500. So this is more than 4 housing units, but less than 500 daily traffic a day. And then when we have those larger developments that are generating more than 500 trips a day, we would require all of those same things, but now we're requiring a capacity assessment additionally and asking the developer to identify possible places where they can do other deficiency mitigation. So this is bringing us more in line with what the cities do, and that we are allowing ourselves to do that capacity assessment for these very large developments. Next slide. So we have done outreach for this process throughout the years, but I want to be clear that we've been doing this for a number of years. And so some of this outreach happened several years ago. We've had staff changes. We have several new planning commissioners since we took it to the planning commission. So we acknowledge that we do need to do another round of outreach. In the last few months, we've been working directly with some of our engineering consulting firms to share the proposed update with them and receive their feedback on it. That's important because the engineering consulting firms are the ones who developers hire to do their traffic impact statements. So they need to be able to understand these requirements and be able to meet them. So that's been a really good round of conversations, but we intend to circle back to these other groups who we had met with initially as well. Next slide. So this slide summarizes what we've heard as we've been out there having these conversations. We definitely hear a desire for consistency, and we hear this from our partners at the cities, and we hear this from developers as well. Ideally, we would have the same standards across all jurisdictions in Washington County, and that would include the state, but that's really difficult for us to do. Every jurisdiction has their own standards adopted at different times with different elected officials and different goals that they were trying to meet. So while this proposed update puts us more in line with some of the cities of Washington County, we still have some differences. We've also heard desire for consistency across the county standards, and some of these clarifications that we intend to do will work towards accomplishing that goal. We clearly hear concerns about any potential additional requirements. Clearly, development is expensive. Improving the system is expensive, and so developers don't want to have a lot of onerous additional requirements, and we don't think that we're creating those. There's a desire for the requirements to be clarified and make it very publicly available. Since this document was adopted in 1986, it is somewhat just difficult to read. The definitions are a little bit out of date. And so we think just simply by updating this, putting it in a searchable PDF file will accomplish some of these goals. And generally, we've heard support for the fact that the county has an emphasis on safety, and support for the fact that we are trying to achieve our multimodal system goals. So these last 2 points are things that we've heard a lot of support for. Next slide. So policy questions for the board, and this is where we can jump into some of the more detailed questions. So as currently proposed, the updated requirements will continue to focus on safety evaluation rather than motor vehicle capacity, except for those very large developers where we are including capacity now. We would expand our safety review to incorporate system completeness and accessibility through the offsite multimodal improvements. We would clarify procedures and update definitions. We would like to know if the board supports what you've heard so far as these proposed updates and revisions. We'd like to hear what questions you have, and then we'd like to know what additional information we can bring back to you in June.
Thank you. I think the information that we were going over at slide 8, where you were talking about differences, and then you also got into slides 9 and 10. I think there's, I want to make sure that we all have had the opportunity through those 3 slides to understand, as you said, moving in line with the cities. So I'm not quite sure how to tee up the conversation. I will say for myself that I'm imagining 2 different schemes. Well, not 2 different schemes, but I have a question about 2 different example types. There are examples of neighborhoods, new development coming in where that development in an area is not adjacent to a county road of significance. So doesn't feed into a major county collector or an arterial. And then there are those neighborhood developments that do, that abut a county arterial. And I'm wondering how each of these gets handled both within an unincorporated area and within a city, because ultimately what I'm trying to understand is what kind of outcome are we leaving behind in these neighborhoods or these areas for 20 plus years, right? Commissioner Rogers highlighted how we already have such a tremendous backlog, and all of us, each of us hears over the years, and you hear it too from constituents about their concerns that they're seeing new developments come in, yet they're not seeing enough access. And it varies from place to place. You know, Hillsborough is doing, I think, an incredible job with South Hillsborough. And North Bethany has a lot of connectivity too. Aloha has a lot more historic development, and parts of Cedar Mill are older as well and missing a lot of things. And there are gaps everywhere, don't get me wrong. So could you help us better understand the situations?
Yeah, I might take a first attempt here. You raise great questions. I mean, these are the things that we grapple with all the time, right? As a development comes in, one of the challenges inherently in the system is that we do have to look at each development on its own, right? It has a specific set of circumstances, a certain size, generates a certain amount of traffic, and it's on a certain road, and there may be certain deficiencies on that road. So then we move into that.
Can play this back.
Mm-hmm.
I'm clearly hearing having more multimodal support, reducing variability across development types. Are we just taking one step to make improvements, or are we that much closer to a alignment or a positive community result as our cities might have?
That is certainly our intention, and I think maybe the question now is a little bit about that underlying policy and maybe the tactics for how we're going about doing that. But that absolutely is our goal. Is we're trying to achieve an outcome, and in particular with a stronger emphasis on bicycle and pedestrian connectivity gaps.
Yeah. So, for example, and I don't mean to monopolize the conversation here, colleagues. I do appreciate the round of outreach that you have done, but we have certainly had the opportunity of seeing at all of our city councils how they're very sensitive to the community outcome. And I know you are too. But as we've looked at this presentation and everything is in words, it's a little bit hard to relate to how these changes of implementation, as you've talked about, will advance the potential outcomes that our communities will experience. And so really trying to better identify with that. And also, I think with regard to the outreach, while I applaud the involvement of the city staff and others through the WCCC TAC, I think as Commissioner Rogers was getting at, 10, 20, 30 plus years into the future, and what are we leaving behind?
So what I'm hearing is that some case studies might be helpful when we come back on June 8th about maybe how a particular development would meet the requirements under our current standards and how they could meet the requirements under the proposed standards. And specifically some case studies about how that may work if it's a city land use application impacting a county road.
Yeah. Go ahead, Commissioner Willie.
Well, so my questions are going to demonstrate my lack of understanding of this process. So let me ask a couple of basic questions there for me. What I'm understanding is that development in our urban unincorporated has a different set of rules than development inside of a city, but impacting county roads. Is that correct? It's a different set of rules that we apply to those two situations?
It is because the development of city has to meet the city's community development code criteria.
Yeah, and I was just going to add to that, Commissioner. So I think we're viewing the way we're reviewing the developments, the assessment of impacts to county roads is consistent whether you're in a city or whether you're outside of a city. As Aaron pointed out, the difference is really in what the city rules are and how those may interact with the county review requirements, which are more focused on safety. So a number of the cities do have capacity improvement requirements that are sort of layered on top of, if you will, any county requirements. And I was going to note too, Aaron mentioned some desire for consistency across the county, and even our cities all have different variations of standards. So generally, most of them have some sort of a variation of a volume to capacity ratio requirement, but the details are somewhat different, and ODOT has its own set of standards that are a little bit different. And so there is just an inherent level of inconsistency. I think the biggest distinction really is just that underlying policy decision that the county took was not to condition based on capacity.
Well, I guess I've always thought that the TDT calculation was volume to capacity. Is that not true?
It's more predicated on volume, I guess. So the TDT rates for different uses are sort of built on the assumptions that go into how much traffic does that particular use add to the system, and sort of getting at a mitigation based on the volume. And the whole purpose of the TDT really is to fund capacity improvements. So you're addressing the volume by collecting the fee, you're addressing the capacity by using those funds to improve the system.
But I think if I heard you correctly, that this tax only provides about 25% of the cost.
I want to not miss that, you know, what our recommendation here is for these larger developments that generate 500 or more trips per day. We are requiring now some analysis of capacity needs and deficiencies in the system, and then using that as a tool to have a conversation with the developer about potentially doing some offsite mitigations, and in an effort to really try to work with them to get the developer to build improvements, perhaps in lieu of paying the TDT. They might build an improvement and then receive TDT credit for a significant amount of that investment that they make in the system. Then the developer typically benefits from having those improvements on the ground, and we benefit by getting them built sooner than later.
Stephen, with what you just said, you described what is proposed.
Yes, that's correct.
Versus
that's
what is currently.
Yes, yes, thank you.
I guess I need to do a little bit more homework. It seems to me like it's important that we have safety-based analysis, but I also think it's important that we have volume to capacity ratio. So, so I'm not sure what I think there. I'd like to have a little bit more opportunity for homework, and you're giving us that by coming back around on June 8th. So I appreciate that. So that's what I'll have to be doing in preparation there. Unless you're asking us today to give you direction, and you come back on June 8th to do that. But
yeah, our purpose today, really, we knew this is sort of a complicated topic, and there were likely to be a lot of questions and some desire for additional information to help you make a good informed choice. And so that's really why we're scheduling these two briefings. And so I think we'll come back June 8th, as Aaron was saying. We can develop some case study examples that I think might help bring this to life a little bit more. And I appreciate the chair's comment about sort of thinking about this kind of from the task of describing those outcomes in the future, right? What is it that we're trying to achieve? And I was just going to say too, I think, you know, Aaron raised a good point. We have been, this effort sort of spawned from our 2014 transportation system plan update, and it's been in our work program since about 2017 or 2018. And so, you know, there has been a lot of turnover just on our own board as well as at city councils. And so I think, again, you know, as we're thinking about these, that's one of the reasons that we wanted to launch this discussion now. You know, again, the policy directive that we got at the time was really just make some tweaks and improvements to our existing fundamental policy approach. And I do think that if the board were interested in maybe amending sort of that some of those underlying policy assumptions, then that's definitely something that we would need to get some clear direction from you on in terms of how to proceed there.
But I think if I could summarize some of what I heard from Commissioner Willie as well, when you come back in June 8th, I think it will help us to be reminded of what these changes might fix moving into the future and what they won't, right? For example, I'll pose that we have a backlog of improvements needed, both locally as well as across the county system. And, you know, as Commissioner Rogers highlighted, MSTIP, the needs already exceed the funding. But with this proposal, we're hoping to not make the situation that much worse with new developments, right?
That's correct.
We have problems we have gaps in urban unincorporated Washington County. These improvements, we're hoping that as there's new development, these improvements can't address those gaps from past developments.
Mm-hmm.
We're trying to make sure that as we move forward, the impact will be, or what's left behind will be shorter than without.
Mm-hmm.
I know I'm not putting this very crisply.
No, I think you've got it pretty good there. You've articulated that fairly well.
Because I'm trying to make sure we're clear. This isn't going to change the funding scenario. This isn't going to make gaps going away. But as we move forward in processing new development applications, we hope to not continue with the same level of gap additions that occur. We're hoping to minimize that a little bit.
Correct. Yeah, and you said one thing that I was just going to come back to. I think the notion that maybe with these amendments we wouldn't necessarily be addressing past gaps or deficiencies, but there actually could be cases where we are actually. So this development may have the opportunity to make an improvement that perhaps could have been conditioned or done with a prior development, but wasn't at the time.
Yeah,
So
I think there are definitely select cases,
right.
But I'm
right.
trying to make sure that we're setting expectations clear in the community that this isn't going to wipe out all those problems.
Yes.
That's how I'm trying to figure out that nuance.
Yeah, great point.
Commissioner Rogers.
Yeah, just a couple of points. I feel a little bit like we're kicking the bear, and maybe we ought to, because it's about time we do. We came out, as you recall, with a strategic plan back in the early 80s. I should say you remember, because not everybody's been here that long. But we did that to try to simply say that we did some services and cities did some services. In order to somewhat address these traffic issues, we had a traffic impact fee. Remember the old TIF fee, which is now gone, and have a TDT. And we made some policy decisions not based upon current standards of air quality, and certainly could not have judged going from about 220 or 30,000 to 630,000 shortly. We had no idea of that. And so what we did is we said that each development stood on its own. You said that earlier. And so we weren't going to make the last guy on the bus buy the bus. And so we came up with some artificial 28%, and it made sense. But all that placed a lot of pressure on MSTIP. And so to Jerry's comments, how does this stuff get paid? Part of it is developer improvements, part of it's TDT, and then the great gap comes to the MSTIP. But the real issue, I'll pick on Hillsborough because you were mayor there, and I'm just looking at you on the camera there. Why would somebody in Hillsborough want to continue to contribute to a program that we admit isn't going to widen the gap, but it maintains the gap? It's not doing a lot. There'll be some improvements. Stephen said there'll be some things that are improved, but we all pay into this MSTIP program. And if you are in the city of Hillsborough and you're trying to mitigate airshed problems with sensors, if you were trying to do certain improvements to make certain that you were addressing the capacity issue, would you feel warm and fuzzy about paying into a MSTIP program that's going to other areas? That was the double taxation issue that we talked about for years. Never really dealt with it, kept kicking the can down the road. So what I see these, and that's why I asked the question, is what are we going to do within the urban growth area where we have urban planning agreements with certain cities? Is there any room to deal with passing that responsibility onto them to implement the procedures and the policies that they were going to implement anyway over time? Or are we going to say, no, we're going to do our own standards, in which it becomes an impediment, frankly, to annexation, because folks are looking and saying, and I won't name areas, but there's some in my district as well, where the city say, no way in the world do we want to get in there. It's just too much infrastructure that's required without any really clear path to resolving it. Because the MSTIP just isn't enough money. it frankly is not enough money. And so I don't know. This is a very interesting issue that there's a lot more. And I think the chair was pointing out the sideboards, and I think she was right to do that, because this thing could overflow those sideboards real quickly. There's a huge, huge bunch of issues that we really have not dealt with in an effective way. So,
but I think we can all agree to your point that if we continue on without changes, we make the situation far worse.
I agree. I agree.
Yeah. And that's where I think we need a little bit more information in this presentation to explain the impact of making no change, right? And then perhaps through the case studies, that will help us in the end come back to, okay, how will these proposed changes make some advancements, while at the same time keeping that clarity of how it's not going to be carte blanche addressing all of the existing problems that we have. Because, you know, rightfully, that change to then what the voters approved for the TDT was doubling of the traffic impact fee, right? Which was a good result, but that, as we all well know, that still leaves us with an over 70% of the problem still left unaddressed. So go ahead, Commissioner Willie.
Yeah, I'm feeling like a little bit, you know, we've talked about MSTIP money being the kind of the backfill. And we've talked about the contrasting, I guess, guidelines or rules between the cities and the county in this regard. So shouldn't we be looping in at least some sort of input from the WCCC, or I mean, it's the technical advisory, WCCC TAC, that also weighs in on the MSTIP money and makes recommendations for those. So shouldn't we be kind of looping them in, or at least asking them what they think? Or am I making this too broad of a discussion? I'm just wondering about that.
We did engage. Oh, go ahead.
I think so this was a first stop here. I think that with improvements and what comes to us June 8th, I think I can imagine easily that we're going to give direction to our staff to then take that June 8th and do another round of outreach that includes WCCC, and for certain city councilors that really get into the weeds in their cities about what happens to their handling of development applications with regard to county arterials.
Yes, absolutely. So we have engaged the WCCC TAC on this project previously. I think the chair just summarized our next steps perfectly. We would intend to go back through the TAC to the WCCC and then to any cities individually. Stacy and I just finished our roadshow on the road standards update, and so we're happy to do the same thing for this update as well.
Yeah, I was going to say these are really sort of related efforts. The road standards is a question of sort of how you build, like to what standard do you build the roads. This is another one of the elements about how do we secure the improvements, in this case from the development community.
So we have just a few more minutes before we need to switch over to an executive session. Commissioners Treese and Fye, the majority of urban unincorporated areas are in your two districts, with some also in Commissioner Rogers. Have you been able to track this conversation so that you can see that additional information will be coming to us for June 8th, as well as you do have the opportunity to have some further briefings with LUT staff as well.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Absolutely. I think definitely for me, I have a homework to do on this issue. And I think some of the questions that I wrote down, Chair Harrington, you actually addressed them and talked about. And it relates to sort of the advancements that you were talking about and how we can get the most wins for certain areas. I know that, not all unincorporated areas of Washington County have the same socioeconomic backgrounds, and not all of them sit on the county roads. For example, for Aloha area, Farmington isn't a county road. So what could be the requirement for a developer who's going to develop, and also what other wins can we get for those areas, and also not to further burden the developer where they don't develop or they don't want to work in that area. And I don't know, this might not be the right word, but sort of incentivize them to come in to do the work. But what other wins can we tackle on for that community? And I know I've seen in my own area, Hazendale development, I was here, and I think there could have been a lot of other wins for our community here. But and then the other thing that you've addressed, Chair Harrington, was the outreach piece, and when do we get, or how do we incorporate and go to the community and say, what inputs do you have? This is the recommendations that we're making. How does this impact you? What else should we consider if a developer were to come into your area and work on this particular land and develop? How do you want the developer to be mitigated, traffic congestions? What else can the county do? So I think the community, it's really important that we incorporate as policymakers for the constituents in our district. I would like to see their inputs and feedback up front. That way I can really vote on the right policy that have the right engagement.
Commissioner Treese.
Thank you. I've had the opportunity to talk to Stephen a little bit about this, but I am looking forward to more information, and I'm looking forward to a briefing. So it's a lot to swallow right now. So thank you.
Thank you, commissioners. Stephen, Aaron, and Stacy, I think you have our attention. I think we're learning a lot, and we're supportive. I think we're just trying to make sure that we have a good understanding, and we have different pieces that we're trying to get our heads around. And from what I'm hearing, you all can see how things like the case studies will help us a little bit more. So I think you've gotten a lot of feedback here. Are you feeling pretty good about moving forward and coming back to us June 8th?
Yep, I think so. Aaron or Stacy, did you have any clarifying questions you want to ask real quick?
No, I don't think so. I think these are some pretty good marching orders to prepare a presentation for June 8th and more materials for you.
Yeah, and I think, walking through this process, learning about the history of what was going on in the 80s with the Growth Management Policy Task Force and the policy decisions that were made at that time and how they affect the TSP or development criteria. I think we'll be able to present some of that to give more background and baseline for the commission as well at that time.
All righty. Well, thank you very much. Good job, team.
Thank you all.
So our next topic is an executive session on labor negotiations pursuant to ORS 192.660 sub 2 sub D. Do we have a motion to enter into executive session?
So, Madam Chair, I had asked Alan to clarify that your next 2 executive sessions go into it under both of the RSs, and then we would bring staff in.
Okay, so.
Yes,
So,
I can do both at one time in one Zoom link.
so we're going to have one motion on both terms.
Correct.
Okay. So executive session, I already talked about the labor negotiations one pursuant to ORS 192.660 sub 2 sub D. And the second one, property negotiations pursuant to ORS 192.660 sub 2 sub E. Commissioner Willie, would you like to continue to make that motion? Do we have a second? Second from Commissioner Fye. All those in favor, please raise your hand or say aye. Commissioner Treese?
Aye.
Thank you. Thank you, commissioners. Any opposed? The motion passes unanimously 5-0. So we'll see you all on a different Zoom link. Thank you. And just so you know, after that, we'll reconvene at 1 o'clock, we hope, back into work session. Thank you.